Today I'm going to be going over the new Timeless Tones palette from Glaminatrix Cosmetics, and I'll be doing my usual detailed swatches for you along with a look using the palette, and then at the end I'll give you my in-depth thoughts, but I'll also be doing some comparisons to a couple of their previous palettes because this is quite a neutral heavy palette and there are a couple of pops of color, but I know that some of you will be curious about how these tones compare to Barely Basic and Nearly Natural in particular, so I'll definitely go over that. And then I will also be using and talking about their brand new brush set. Also, just in case you're new to my channel, my name is Noopur and I love indie makeup and all things color and sparkle, and thank you so much for clicking on this video. I would really appreciate it if you could give the video a like and consider subscribing if you aren't already subscribed. So these products are launching on Saturday, June 7th at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I don't know the pricing for either of them right now, but once I do, I will update the description box with it. And full disclosure, I did receive these in PR, and I'm also an affiliate with the brand, so you can use my affiliate code Noopur to save at checkout, and I will get a small commission from it, so thank you so much if you use it. That said, I'm not trying to convince you to purchase this palette, despite how excited I get about sparkly and shiny things. These videos are simply here as a resource to give you a well-rounded idea of what the palette is like so that you can determine if it is something that you would like to purchase. Here's the cover. Usually Glaminatrix does pretty simple faux leather type of packaging, but this time they worked with a designer to make something inspired by some vintage compacts. Then here's the inside. It is magnetic with the usual smaller Glaminatrix pans. There are 12 mattes and 8 shimmers. The column of shimmers on the left are all iridescents. Here are my photo swatches so you can see the entire color story all at once, as well as all of those beautiful shifts and the sparkle. These are all of the mattes swatched separately. The formula is pretty creamy but also quite powdery, so there's a good amount of kick up in the pan, but they are super pigmented and blend easily. It's me again popping in to let you know how I do my individual shimmer swatches. So I do a built up swatch up top and a sheer swatch at the bottom, and then when I'm moving my hand like this in front of the camera, I do it both in focus as well as out of focus so that you can get a good idea of what the eyeshadow looks like. Classy is an iridescent that shifts pink, peach, and yellow, but there are also blue sparkles mixed in, giving it a dimensional look, especially since the blue particles are more sparkly than the base color. Overall, though, it has a small particle size and is smooth. Effortless is an iridescent that shifts gold, green, and even teal at a sharp angle. It looks a little dimensional, but it's hard to make out the few multicolored sparkles. It has a small particle size and smooths out easily. This one felt very creamy in the pan. Expensive is an iridescent that shifts blue, purple, and pink. This one looks a little textured in the pan, but it does smooth out really well. It is super vibrant and sparkly. Delicate has no base and doesn't shift at all. It is a pure icy silver white and has an intense sparkle and shine to it. It can be built up to a more reflective finish or sheared out as a topper. It has a small particle size and very little texture. Dignified has a cool toned rosy taupe base with brilliant silver sparkles that are extremely high shine. There's no shift to this one. I feel like there are two different sizes of sparkles, which gives it a dimensional finish. Overall, it has a little texture but can be smoothed out. Everlasting has a rich, warm brown base with sparkles that shift green, blue, and purple with a mild dimensional finish. The shifts are cool toned and a bit desaturated, so it fits with the more neutral vibe of the palette. It has a small particle size. Exquisite has a very sheer light gray base and sparkles that shift blue, purple, and pink. The sparkles are super brilliant and almost wet looking, but not quite. The shadow has a medium particle size but can be smoothed out. Grace is a baked shade. It has a very deep charcoal base with twinkling different size silver sparkles that give it a very dimensional finish. There is some textured graininess to the shade and it feels a little thick and creamy in the pan, but it smooths out when swatched. This is the 8-piece brush set that is also launching alongside the palette. These have synthetic bristles and are entirely custom made, including the handles which have finger indentations. Hello, this is my first time doing like an overhead setup type of thing, and I want to just start doing this for comparisons. It's still a work in progress. This may not be like the best lighting or whatever, but hopefully it's helpful, and thank you for bearing with me while I figure it out. So this is Barely Basic and this is Timeless Tones, and I think you can see that Barely Basic is a lot warmer overall compared to Timeless Tones, especially these two columns of mattes. This one I wouldn't say is warm toned. It's very mauvey pinky, you know what I mean? And there's nothing like that over here. If anything, this row over here, or this column of mattes rather, is the most similar to the neutral mattes over here, but I've gone ahead and done some swatches. On this side is Barely Basic, and on this side is Timeless Tones, and I feel like the two like bone colored mattes are similar, but aside from that, nothing like super similar. These palettes are similar in that this has a row of iridescence up top and a column of iridescence in this palette over here, but there are no identical tones. I've gone ahead and done swatches again. On this side is Fairly Basic, on this side is Timeless Tones. I would say that this iridescent over here and this one over here are similar, but they are not identical. I feel like the finish is not the same. This one is more of like a traditional like gold to green type of iridescent, whereas this one is a lot more dimensional. One last thing I noticed is that this shimmer and this shimmer are pretty similar in finish and texture to this shimmer over here. So once again, I've done some swatches and I feel like the one from Timeless Tones is a little bit cooler and more taupey than this one over here in Barely Basic, which is a bit more mauve-y. Here's Timeless Tones next to Nearly Natural, which was recently released. And once again, overall, I feel like this palette is a lot warmer than this palette. That said, I do feel like there is some overlap in the lighter matte shades. Of course, both of the palettes have a black matte, so I didn't swatch that, but I did swatch a lot of the lighter, like neutral mattes, and I think you can see they are a little similar. And so that's why I was saying that I wish that this palette had more like proper cool tone mattes that weren't super light, because I think that would have set this apart from this palette. When it comes to the shimmers, I feel like these palettes are very different. To start with, most of the shimmers in this palette are less sparkly than the shimmers in this. When I reviewed Nearly Natural, I mentioned that it's not that these shimmers aren't sparkly, it's just that they are more refined sparkle and they just give you a more like elegant look on the eyes. I feel like this is very like office friendly and for people who are maybe not ready for that like indie level of sparkle. That said, there is one shade in this palette, Smolder, that is very sparkly because it's a baked shade, and it is pretty similar to the shade Grace in this palette. Super technically, Grace is a charcoal and Smolder is a black, but I've gone ahead and swatched them over here. Grace is very similar to Smolder. It's a little bit lighter and a little bit more cool tone, but realistically on the eye, I don't think you'll see much of a difference. I also went ahead and swatched Naked Eye next to Delicate over here, and I think you can see in the swatch that Naked Eye is a lot more like, it has a finer particle size and it's sparkly, but it's just a bit more refined versus Delicate, which is very high shine, very impactful, and also icier in my opinion. And then the last thing that I wanted to point out is when I reviewed this palette over here, I mentioned that these two shades up here were the most like sparkly non-baked shades. They are very like high shine and metallic compared to like these two, for example, or these ones down here. But I went ahead and I swatched one of them over here, and then I swatched this shade Dignified on this side. And I think you can see that in comparison, Dignified is a lot more shiny and reflective and metallic and sparklier. Then really quickly, I wanted to show you these three mini palettes next to Timeless Tones, which these have been discontinued, so you can no longer get them. But just in case you have them and you're curious what they look like next to this palette, here they are. I'm not even really going to swatch these because I don't think that they're similar at all to Timeless Tones. The neutral one is a lot warmer overall, and then the green and blue ones are a lot more like saturated and punchy in comparison to the green and blue tones in this palette. Like over here, they're a lot more muted and like neutral leaning. The one exception is this topper shade over here is a little similar to this silvery white shade over here. I went ahead and swatched them over here so that you can see that. The last comparison that I have is to Sugar and Spice because the brand recently restocked this, and I feel like this has a somewhat similar concept of like neutrals with pops of color, but I do feel like the overall vibe of this palette is different. It's definitely more colorful as a whole in comparison to this, but I did go ahead and swatch the similar mattes between the two palettes. You can make the call as to how similar they are. What I will say is that I feel like the formula of the mattes have vastly improved from this palette to this one. So I much prefer this matte formula. I also quickly wanted to compare these three shimmers next to each other. If you've been following me on Instagram for a very long time, you will know that I used to rave about this eyeshadow Basil. I still really love it, and I wanted to compare it next to Exquisite. I feel like they're similar concepts, but not exactly the same. Like the color of the sparkles and the shifts are the same, but I feel like overall Basil is more wet looking, and Exquisite to me is like more opaque in the sparkles, if that makes sense. Like, it's more sparkly metallic than the wet look of Basil. I also wanted to show Nutmeg next to Dignified because they're both like intensely sparkly neutral shades. I feel like Nutmeg is more of like a true like rose gold versus Dignified is more of like a rosy taupe, but they are both like similar levels of sparkle and texture. Lastly, I have Vanilla next to Effortless, and I feel like they are similar in shifts, but the formula is different. Vanilla is almost like that, what I like to call an older generation of iridescence. They are less sparkly, like this is less sparkly than this one, and it's just like thicker and leaves more of a white cast, so I much prefer this formula. So I have already done a look with this palette for shorts, and that should either already be up or it'll be up like the day after you're watching this video. And for that look, I used some of the neutral mattes, and I don't fully know what I want to do for this look, but I do know that I want to stick to using some of the colorful mattes. I'm going to start by dipping into this green matte over here, and there was quite a bit of kick up right there. I don't know if you saw it on screen, but there is like some powderiness over here. I picked it up on the E01 brush, which is the largest blending brush in the set, and I'm going to go ahead and put that into my crease. Since I've already done the other eye, I learned that this matte is a bit on the more like buildable side, which is pretty standard for Glaminatrix matte formula. They are pigmented, but you can shear them out easily, though I do wonder how much of that is due to this brush. This is, you know, a fine size for my eyes to apply like a light wash of matte in the crease, but I think if your eyes are smaller than mine, or if you are working with like a darker shade, this would border on being like too big. In fact, it is bordering on being too big for me. I would only use this for like putting a light wash of a matte in the crease. I went in with another layer. I'm building it up a bit, and I'm comfortable using, you know, a slightly bigger brush for this matte because there's like a slightly muted quality to this green. So, you know, it's not like it's pigmented, but it's not like super vibrant on my skin. And so I'm fine with it kind of going everywhere. Also lightly running this on my lower lash line. Nothing, you know, too crazy over here. I use the E04 brush for my lower lash line, and I love this kind of brush for applying eyeshadow to my lower lash line because it's super like pointed and tiny. It's a very tiny pencil brush, and so it allows you to put on pigment very precisely down there. Now I'm going to dip into this green matte over here, and all three of these greens are pretty cool toned, but this one in the middle has a lot of blue in it. Not like enough to make it a teal shade, but it's definitely a very blue toned green. This time I'm using the E02 brush, and I'm taking this around my entire like outer corner and into the crease. I am going to go in with one more shade to deepen things up, but that is an extremely dark shade, so I don't want it to go on super smoky, and that's why I'm laying down this shade first. This brush is making it very easy to blend this shade out. It took me like no time to do this side, and I feel like whenever I'm filming, I get very anxious, and so I get a little bit more like careful with my blending, but off camera it took me no time at all. And I guess this time on camera it didn't really take me much time either. I'm just softening up this edge a bit and then blending it into that lighter green matte. You can see that E02 is smaller than E01, and I do think that for some people this might work better in the crease to put down a transition shade, but for me it works pretty well for the outer corner. Also running this shade on the lower lash line, and I love the tone of greens like this when they lean more blue, so I'm going to take this like pretty much along my entire lower lash line, blend it into that lighter green matte. Now I'm going to dip into this dark green matte, but just the tiniest amount because I only want to add a little bit of depth on my outer corner. So I'm taking it on the E07 brush, and here it is compared to E02. I feel like they're kind of like similar sizes, but different shapes almost. Like E02 comes to more of a point at the top, and this one's more like almost like flat, I guess, at the top, and it's also more sparse. This is a bit more, I wouldn't say dense, but this is just like very loose in comparison, and not like my preferred type of brush for like deepening up the outer corner, but it's really the only brush in the set that I could use to do that, so I'm gonna have to like adjust my technique a little bit. I'm gonna start per usual, kind of just like tapping it onto the lid, but I'm mainly going to be using tapping motions and not as many blending movements. Also working in very, very light layers, so I went in with just a little bit more, and once again going to just like tap it here into the outer corner. Very, very lightly. Now I'm going to take the dark green on the same pointed pencil brush and run that just very, very tight to my lash line on the outer edge over here. I really love this specific brush because I feel like I can do my entire lower lash line with just this brush since it comes to such a point at the tip. Also using the precision with this brush to kind of add a little bit more pigment right here along the lash line. Moving on to the shimmers, I'm gonna pick up this blue shimmer over here. You can see the shimmer on the brush here. This is the E03 brush, and this is not my favorite type of brush for putting shimmer all over the lid because I prefer a flat packing brush for precision, but this is quite like, I don't wanna say fluffy, but it's like pretty thick over here. Hopefully you can see what I mean. So I'm going to apply this on the outer 2/3 of my lid, and the reason that I don't like brushes like this is because, first of all, a brush application is not going to give you as much pigment as your finger, but with a fluffy brush, that decreases even more. And also with brushes like this, I feel like they are more prone to giving you shimmer fallout, which I don't mind too much, but like, I don't want like, you know, piles of shimmer down here. So here's the application with just the brush. And I did, you know, use the brush for this eye, but then I went in with another layer on my finger, and I feel like that gave me the type of impact that I'm looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I picked up a little bit more, and I know it might partially be due to me adding more shimmer on top, but I just feel like using my finger allows me to kind of like really mesh it into my eyelid and help it stick down without glitter glue. I will say what I really do like this type of brush for is kind of like pseudo blending the shimmer into the crease and outer corner. I don't like to like fully blend the shimmer into there, but I do like to like tap it out a little bit because of my eye shape. I have deep set eyes. I do get shimmer transfer up into my crease, so I just put some shimmer there to start with since it's anyway going to end up there. For the rest of my lid, I'm going to pick up this shimmer over here. I'm picking it up on the E05 brush, and here it is in comparison to E03, which you can see is much fluffier and much bigger. I do actually really enjoy this type of brush for applying shimmer in the inner portion of my lid because it's very, very precise. I feel like it would look absolutely bonkers all over the lid, like in a very thick layer if you want something very, very high impact and metallic, but that's just not my style. It is pretty piecey though, and not like, I wouldn't say loosely pressed, but prone to fallout, which is why I'm working in very thin, small layers. I do feel like the pieciness would make this a really good topper though. Finally, for the inner corner, I'm going to pick up this shimmer over here. I picked it up on the E08 brush, and I am very, very excited about this brush because this is my exact preferred type of brush for applying shimmers over here. It's really tiny, so you can do a super targeted application without things getting messy. And it's also got some give to it, like some flexibility without being too dense. So I can do this motion in my inner swoop and it works perfectly. I think this could also work for the lower lash line like the E04 brush, which I use, but this one is a bit more dense and pointed. So this is not like my preferred type of brush for the inner swoop just because it's harder to do like this motion with it without it like dragging a little bit. Here's the final look. I wanted to keep the rest of my face pretty cool toned, especially my lips. I'm wearing MAC's Stone on my lips and I feel like it complements the eye makeup really, really well. And for the cheeks, I really wanted to use the Glaminatrix liquid blushes, but I feel like this shade and the shade Kind is like the coolest tone that I could find amongst all of the blushes, and it's very, very vibrant, which I didn't really want, so I mixed it with a little bit of Gentle to kind of like mute it down a touch. It is sparkle cam time, and I'm so glad that you can see the shifts in the blue shimmer because you can see it goes from this very, very bright blue straight on to more of this like royal blue at an angle, and then all the way to a purple at a very sharp, sharp angle. And also, in the inner corner shimmer, you can see the multicolored sparkles over there, like the pink and the blue. I just feel like it's kind of like a fun pop, like a contrast where you have like this like neutral icy shimmer in between the two colorful shades. So I feel like Glaminatrix has really found a niche in making these like wearable, everyday, neutral spicy neutral, neutral adjacent with like a pop of color type of palettes. And I'm really, really happy to see a more cool toned option because I feel like the other two that come to mind, Barely Basic and Nearly Natural, both of those lean a lot more warm toned. That said, I do feel like this palette is the most overtly colorful of all three. It's not that the other palettes don't have colorful tones, but I feel like they have more like mauves, olives, warm rusty tones, which a lot of people do consider more like neutral friendly. And I feel like green and blue are firmly in the colorful camp. But I do think that it makes sense that these are a bit on the muted side, like especially these three tones. Like they are very, very kind of like, I wouldn't say like super desaturated, but they aren't like the most vibrant shade. So I think it makes sense to have like that type of colorful matte in a neutral palette, especially if you're someone who is kind of like scared of colorful tones or only occasionally dips into them. I think that these are a lot more approachable. And even with the shimmers, you have 3 neutral shimmers and the rest are more colorful. But I feel like with the iridescents, you know, if you don't layer those over a matte, they're going to be very, very soft, very like approachable for people who don't really like to use color a lot. And even these 2 colorful shimmers over here, they have like brown and gray bases, so they're gonna melt really, really well into the neutral mattes and just be more like user-friendly, I think. I will say, personally, I really wish that one of these like lighter beige mattes had been swapped out for a light blue matte because we don't really have anything to blend out this blue over here with. You could blend it out with, you know, the gray or like a light green or one of the neutrals, but considering the fact that there is a lighter green in this row, I don't know why there isn't a lighter blue. And I just feel like there are a lot of beiges, and quite honestly, I can't use like either of these as transition shades. They're both really, really light. And this one actually leans a little bit warm. I wouldn't call it like super, super warm, but in comparison to the other cool tone neutral shades, it is the warmest of the bunch. And so that's where there's like a little bit of disconnect in this palette for me. I just feel like we could have done with more like overtly cool tones and less beiges. And while we're at it, I do wish that this black wasn't in the palette. I'm not the biggest fan of black mattes in the palette, and I know that they make sense for neutral palettes, but I just feel like with a cool toned palette, it's kind of like a missed opportunity to not do a deep charcoal or like a gray matte. I feel like the only gray matte that we actually have is this one over here. Everything else leans more brown or beige. Now let's talk about the brushes. I think that they're really good quality. They are extremely soft, and I'll have to see how they hold up after multiple washes, but as of right now, super, super soft, and they blended things pretty well. One of the minor complaints that I had with these brushes is that I feel like the text on the handle is pretty hard to read. Like, it is a super, super like thin and fine font, and some of the numbers are a little like almost borderline illegible, and I had to do some like guesswork to figure out which brush was which. And realistically, in practice, it won't matter for me. I'm not really thinking about the brush name, especially since they are sold as a set, but just like sitting here in front of the camera trying to tell you which brush was which, I was like struggling a little bit. Also, I really hope that Glaminatrix plans to sell these individually in the future, because I did not love every single brush in this set. Like I said, I felt like this one was borderline too big for the crease, and I felt like this one was too like splayed out for the outer corner, and I didn't love this one for putting shimmer all over my lid. But I really, really loved this brush over here, the one that I used in my inner corner, and I would love to pick up a few more of these. I also really liked this one that I used on my lower lash line. I feel like this shape is pretty uncommon because it's super precise but dense enough to put enough pigment down there, so I would again love to pick up a couple more of these. The only one that I didn't use today was E06, which is like the angled brush, and this is the type of brush that I would use to draw on an eyeshadow wing, and it's very thin and small and precise, so I don't anticipate this being like a bad brush. All right, that's it for this video. I hope that you learned everything you wanted to about this palette, and if you have any questions about something that I didn't get to, please let me know down in the comments and I will definitely get back to you. As always, thank you so much for watching till the end. I truly, truly appreciate it. Please don't forget to give this video a like before you go, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!